Good evening, everyone, and welcome to International House. My name is Sean Carver. I'm the Executive Director here at International House at UC Berkeley. It's wonderful to see, I think, not a relative. It's wonderful to see such an engaged audience with promises to be an insightful discussion tonight on AI's evolving role in geopolitics, innovation, and global cooperation. This event is part of an ongoing series, and last year, some of you may remember, some of you I'm sure were here, we had the privilege of interviewing Eric Schmidt as we explored what was titled The Promise and Perils of AI just a year ago. Since that year, the pace of AI development has been staggering. The emergence of DeepSeek is reshaping the AI landscape. The Stargate project is redefining US national security and innovation. And the competition between global AI ecosystems has only intensified. Tonight, we'll examine these changes and their profound implications on the world. I'm especially honored to introduce our moderator, Dr. Olaf Groth, who I fondly remember sitting in the front row, right about there, at last year's event. I first met Olaf in 2013 when he was teaching a course at the business school where we were both affiliated with. Our paths crossed once again here at UC Berkeley, and it is a privilege to welcome him this evening. For over 30 years, Dr. Groth has been a global futurist, strategist, and thought leader on AI, emerging technologies, and international strategy. He has worked with senior leaders across over 35 countries, bridging sectors and disciplines to help organizations navigate technological disruption. As the founding CEO of Cambrian Futures and Cambrian Labs, he leads efforts to shape the future of AI, data, and governance. He also serves as a professor of practice at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, faculty director of the Berkeley Executive Education, and an expert contributor to the World Economic Forum's Global Expert Network. And I see him on TV quite often as well. Olaf's expertise aligns perfectly with the mission of iHouse, which has spent nearly a century fostering global understanding, collaboration, and leadership. At a time when AI is transforming the very nature of international cooperation, tonight's discussion could not be more relevant, and the fact that we had 250 RSVPs for this event shows that you think so as well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Olaf Groth.
Thank you, Sean. I'll try to do your very humbling introduction justice tonight. I will say that that between my three panelists, we have at least the brain trust of an Eric Schmidt on this panel. And so hopefully we will have a sparky conversation that inspires you and stimulates you, because I intend to make this as interactive as possible with you. So please don't hesitate to mentally note questions and raise your hand when that time comes. I'm very appreciative of my opportunity to sit on stage here, because Sean almost forgot the most important thing about me, and that is that I too am an iHouse alumnus. And proudly so. I will tell you that I won't give you the exact number because it would date me, but I will tell you it's been multiple decades. And iHouse looked a bit different, and then again, not so different. So I still recognize it, and I'm appreciative for the opportunity. But tonight is about AI collaboration across borders. And really the question, excuse me, of what is the future of that collaboration amidst all the geopolitics. I have a phenomenal panel with me, and I will introduce them one by one briefly before I ask them to give me their position and their outlook on the problem in the context of their specific and fantastic experience, and you'll see what that is. My first book, as Sean said, was about artificial intelligence called Solomon's Code. We wrote it 6 years ago. Clearly, the world has changed significantly, but even then we predicted that geopolitics would grab a hold of it. Our second book, The Great Remobilization, Smarter Designs for a Smarter Global Future, which I shall shamelessly advertise here for the Starving Professors Fund. Oh wait, you're telling me I'm an entrepreneur too, so I guess I'm not starving. But this book has a lot of the questions in it that we are going to be asking tonight. In this book, we are describing a global cognitive economy driven by AI, data, other technologies like crypto, cybersecurity technologies, brain-computer interfaces, quantum computing, a future that is at once very fragmented because these are power tools that the powerful continue to use to increase their power. And the question of democratization of those tools is a big one out there, with or without open source. And yet there is that other flip side potential of using these technologies, first and foremost artificial intelligence, for greater understanding across borders, greater understanding of nature, greater understanding of spirituality, greater creativity, greater productivity. So there is a definitive positive and bright side to the assumed negative aspects of AI as a power tool and as an object and a subject of international competition. And so I'm very pleased to introduce this panel to you, where we will explore those tensions and see where the future might lie. Let's see. We are going to be talking to James first, and I will just say that James has been a friend of mine and a collaborator of mine for a number of years now. He is the CEO and co-founder of AI for Good Foundation. As such, as the name says, he is dedicated to examining and promulgating AI for social good. But very specifically, James is consulting with governments around the world as well about AI and about other emerging technologies and what kinds of policies we might put in place to create peaceful use of those. However, he's also invested in Ukraine and is working with the Ukrainian government, with the European Commission, to ensure that we have Ukraine's back, and AI and emerging technologies are part of that. So sometimes standing up for the right thing, I suppose, does mean that we need to deploy power tools for defensive purposes as well. So I will come back to you in just a moment, but let me allow me to introduce Anne-Sophie Serret as well, who is the co-founder and executive director of Everyone.ai. And Everyone.ai is a nonprofit focused on opportunities and risks of AI for young people. As such, she was just at the Paris AI Action Summit, and I'm eager to hear what her perspectives are on this. Her organization focuses on the impact of AI on children's cognitive and socio-emotional development. In fact, she's just handed me a great report in which that topic is being examined, and she'll probably say a bit more about that. And then we also have with us Tianyu Feng, who is a fellow at the New America Foundation, underwritten by the MacArthur Foundation, and is co-founded Chaiyong. I'm going to mispronounce this. Chaiyong Trap, right? Trap. Okay. A newsletter on Chinese internet culture, quite stimulating. I subscribe today, and I would advise you, if you're interested in China and technology, to do the same thing. And his work has been featured in publications like Foreign Policy. He specializes in technological issues in China as well as geopolitically beyond China, right? So we will hear their opinions, each one of them, but one by one. But for now, let me start off with James and say, so James, you are involved in helping Ukraine through this crisis. And so what role does AI play there in this international collaboration to help Ukraine? You're talking to the European Commission as well. What is international collaboration on AI and technology in the context of what's going on in Europe?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Olaf, for all of the wonderful introductions. And I wanted to point out to the audience that if we look at you a bit funny over the next hour, it's because we can't actually see any of you. It's so bright up here. But we also, I think, want you to be part of the conversation a little bit, right? So if there are people who have something to say, I would like to hear it while I'm talking, at least. I can't speak for the other panelists. Oh, that's nice. Okay. But let me jump into what you just said, because yes, You've hinted at a lot of the issues that there are right now with the global development of AI technologies, right? And globally, we've developed big technologies in the past as a human race, right? We managed to develop the steam engine, we managed to develop electricity, we've managed to develop Facebook, and other incredible technologies like that. But we're in a very fragmented state. And that fragmentation means that where we get ideas and innovation, they happen in the cracks. It's been very difficult so far to get that to be a coordinated innovation ecosystem that breaks boundaries even within a country, right? I would say even within the valley, as opposed to here's a great thing, here's a great thing. And so in Ukraine, as you can imagine, right, and we've been working since February of 2022 with the Ukrainian government because they reached out to us and they said, look, we've got problem X, Y, and Z, and I'll tell you what those problems were that they reached out to us with in a moment. How do we solve these right now, right? It's a crisis. We need to, come together and figure out a solution for this challenge. And so it's a microcosm, right? We identify challenges, we try to fix them, but we haven't yet built those superstructures that are going to allow us to work together in a way that could do even bigger things faster and more transformative things faster. So we got involved with the Ukrainian government because they reached out and said, last week when Russia invaded us with 200,000 troops that they had been amassing on the border for months before, lots of NGOs rushed into the country. They weren't operating in Ukraine before. They haven't operated in this kind of war because nobody has operated in this kind of war for 80 years. And they're posting information about everything that they're doing all over the internet, right? And I'm talking to kind of one of the top people in Zelensky's office. And he says, last night, 50 medical centers in Kiev got hit by missiles. 50, one night. Guess in what order they were hit? Well, it followed exactly the default ordering of the medical centers that are open that was listed on the Red Cross's website. Okay. So we were in a situation where there was a lot of open data to try to help people, but it was being misused. I guess misuse is not quite the right word for it. And so we started working with the government to basically hide the information from people who should not be accessing it. So we very quickly built behavioral models that looked at all of the places where this information is posted. We put the information behind Ukraine's e-government system, which is the most advanced e-government system in the world. It already was in 2022. Now it's even 10 times further along than it was back then. And basically, we were able to see when people would be suspiciously checking out a lot of different aid distribution centers or medical centers or shelters or other outlets that are required during that kind of crisis. And we were able to feed that information to the intelligence service, and they were able to go and find and break up massive groups of saboteurs across Ukrainian cities. And that was a very simple use of AI, right? It was a simple use of identifying patterns, of basically doing real-time graphical modeling of how the behaviors in this system are piecing together. And we were able to do it within a couple of weeks. And that started our relationship with the government. But as an organization, we're also half economists, which means that when we think about the technology that we're building, we're also thinking about the policy that supports it and the institutions that allow it to be framed in the context of the challenges that are being faced. So it's not just about building AI for the sake of building AI, it's about building AI for the sake of putting in place the right institutions that will support the maximum transformation for the good from that. Over the last 3 years now, unfortunately, 3 years, we have expanded what we've done with the Ukrainian government from that to working on war crimes, so being able to identify kind of where to look, whom to speak to, how to gather evidence, building massive archives of these stories that people, the experiences of people. And by the way, last year we had a big exhibition in this hall of those stories. And actually, if I keep going, I'll talk for 2 hours just about what we're doing in Ukraine.
No, this is already fascinating, and I want to point out that there is a creative tension here, right? That you and I think, are living every day, and I think that hopefully the audience will appreciate that. When we talk about international collaboration, that is not necessarily sitting around a campfire and singing Kumbaya with AI on the table. Sometimes international collaboration. So you teed us up here a little bit by saying, look, we're creating some defensive capabilities here in Ukraine that we have to create for the sake of survival of Ukrainians. But we're also trying to build institutions that will transport some of those capabilities into building a civil society or building a healthy ecosystem for innovation, et cetera, right? I will tell you that I was approached to serve on the board of a Ukrainian drone company that does combat drones, AI controlled. And of course, they have scale out aspirations in the civilian sector as well. And so the question is, again, that civil-military fusion, which we're going to come back to when it comes to China, is a very hard, it's a very pronounced tension, right? Because what you do for good on one side can and will be used against other people at some point on the other side, right? So I just want to capture that tension, and we can come back around it, unless you have an immediate comment here.
I do, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
I always have an immediate comment.
I figured you do.
But I also would like other people to contribute. Let me tell you an anecdote, okay? I'll tell you an anecdote about before the war, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, and I'm going to treat this loosely with the facts, because basically Ukraine was using drones since 2016. That wasn't something that started in 2022 with some great new invention. They've been using drones for a while to basically shift traditional warfare from a reconnaissance plus attack type of strategy, which anybody who's kind of read military handbooks over history, I'm sure everybody has in this room, will know that about a third of a traditional army historically were scouts, people who would be sent out and just gathering information. And that was basically the assumed logic behind warfare all the way up to the 2010s, that a lot of people are actually employed in collecting, transforming, analyzing information, and then turning it into a strategy. The advent of drones reduced the number of people that you need to scout and gather that information by about 50%, which means that, yeah, you still have teams, you have computers, you have all of this analysis happening, you've got oversight for it, but it reduced that workload by 50%, which means it reduced the fatalities in that segment of the military forces by about 70%, because it's not linear, right? You're taking away actually the jobs that were the most dangerous in those contexts. Now, that's still a lot of people who are just doing reconnaissance, right? So over the last few months, we have been able to help to make it so that you don't have to run as many drones. In fact, we're going to get to the point where we don't have to run any drones to get the same level, and we'll be able to get another 60% fewer casualties from reconnaissance in a modern military force, which means you're taking people out of harm's way, and actually you're helping people to make better decisions. Just an anecdote, right, we think about it as killer drones are going to go and target people. But actually, there's a lot of collateral damage that you avoid, and there's a lot of the direct risk of doing what you have to do anyway, and that we've done for thousands of years, that you can then avoid.
Yeah, and look, obviously you have to do first things first, and then possibly worry about the rest. But still, you could make the point that one person's reconnaissance is another person's surveillance when AI is in the mix. And again, I will put myself on the line here, right? Another venture that I serve on the advisory board on does surveillance and digital twinning with AI of infrastructure, civil infrastructure. It's in the Middle East, and so one of my concerns is how do we govern this thing across borders so that it complies with our value sets on surveillance technology, right, and respects civilians on the other side of the ocean, as it were. But let me now loop in Anne-Sophie, who focuses on something that everybody agrees needs protection, right? And I will tell you that I'm the son of a German father who was a child during the ending days of World War II, and I still remember him telling me before he passed, as he was recollecting the Russians with which he came into contact, that he said, the Russians loved children, and they treated German children well. And whatever else you say about war, and particularly that war, that was something that stuck in my mind, and of course, who doesn't love children, right? So ostensibly, everybody agrees that's a great area for international collaboration, right? If there wasn't that little factoid that the United States, 2.5 weeks ago at the AI Summit, Action Summit in Paris, set out some very clear expectations amongst other participants of the Action Summit, that it did not view those Action Summits anymore as a matter of exploring ethical boundaries, seeing the whole exercise in the light of safety, but rather reframed the whole series of summits single-handedly. So my question to you, you were there. What was the experience like? And is this the end of international collaboration through these summits? Was it a failure? Was it a success? Something in between? Talk to us about that.
Yes, thank you so much. Very glad to be here. Very glad to share this experience about the AI Action Summit. And yes, children is an anonymity. It's a consensus. Everyone wants to protect children. And even J.D. Vance mentioned it is in speech. So very little, but it say that everybody agrees we want to protect children. And I think we can just see that there is a global race about AI, and the business is taking over everything. And I think it was a major technique and also strategy for France to lead the discussion. Of course, Europe and France are very late compared to US and China, so they really had a chance to bring business and to lead Europe discussion, and also to take some step back from regulation discussion. I don't think we will not talk about safety anymore, and actually it was a lot of discussion, a lot of different rooms who mentioned ethic and also sustainability. It was the first time that sustainability was actually a topic. I think you mentioned that the deliverable of what came out of the summit was very business-oriented and very innovation-oriented. So we heard a lot about those $109 billion that the French government make a lot of deals with different companies, which is actually good compared to the size of the country, compared to Stargate at 500 billion. It's a good number for France. And I think this willingness to put business first and to enter this global race took a little bit over the communication. But the deliverable of the summit was also about safety, trustworthy, ethical AI. So that was not a binding, unfortunately, that was not a binding agreement. But still, one of the deliverables, like the second deliverable after the big number of business, was about ethical and trustworthy AI.
Thank you for that. Let me hook right in there. If we now go to the other side, Europe, the speech that Ursula von der Leyen made at the AI Summit was also quite telling, because my expectation was that she would pull it back to a very European position of putting individual dignity and individual respect and ethics and values front and center. Instead, she proceeded to frankly converge, without saying it necessarily, on J.D. Vance's speech. And her speech was decidedly more economic in nature than I had expected, talking about European mega projects, right? Again, drawing the parallel to Stargate with a CERN of AI, talking about new spending for entrepreneurs, talking about open source, just like J.D. Vance did, right? So I had the feeling that both sides we're kind of playing into that theme of reframing AI in national security terms and economic development terms, rather than social justice and civil rights. But what you're telling me is, yeah, but underneath all of it, on a working level, and you're sort of implying that's what really matters at the end of the day as we make things work, there were a lot of people discussing solutions and innovation when it comes to more values-based development of AI. But how promising is that really when the top level says, but the money is going to the entrepreneurs and to the national security people, not to the IGOs and the safety and ethics folks?
Business first, I think this really came from this summit, and the summit was called Action Summit. So they really want to break the cycle of not looking for safety and for worries. And as you said, as we already mentioned, it was a lot of discussion. And also I want to mention that it was a lot of side events as well. And I really want to acknowledge the Stuart Russell event, who was huge in OECD place. So those discussions happened with very high-level experts in the world talking about ethics. Now, yes, the deliverable and those two speeches cannot summarize everything. Even if we wish, they will continue the discussion. For me, the real challenge is now what was said about sustainable and ethic AI. Will it be just a few discussions over there, or will they continue to build on that? Emmanuel Macron is really clear about the willingness to do business ethically, and he said that a few times in his speech. So hopefully that will not be just a speech, and that we can build on that. Europe also feel the need about doing business, and a lot of investment were mentioned during her speech. So hopefully we will be able to do business in the right way. And my own opinion is that there is no reason we should sacrifice users. Yes, we can do business. AI is a lot of opportunity. It can have a lot of opportunities, including for children and including of all different continents, but there is no reason we should sacrifice users. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you would hope so, because after all, you can't really conduct business and grow your business if you're losing trust amongst customers and stakeholders. And we've seen some backlash to that effect here in the United States as well, right? But we'll have to see. The proof will be in the pudding, I suppose. I want to
add something.
Yeah, please.
And also we need to use AI to resolve issues and not to create new ones. The wave of mental health we are experiencing with social media is very little to compare to what may come if we are not using AI the right way, including for the 0 to 25 years old that are their brain data still developing. So this is very important to use AI ethically and to do it beneficially for the users.
Yeah, and you actually made the point when we recently met that it's not just about children, even grown-ups are starting to change their cognition patterns. And of course, in every technological revolution, you give up some and you lose some, but what that is exactly matters, right? Okay, let me get to Tianyu first, next. Tianyu, you're an expert on China and technology and the geopolitics of it all. In recent years, really, across different administrations in the United States, we here in America have heard a lot about competition with China rather than collaboration with China. I think the West Coast is more collaboration focused than the East Coast, where, with a little bit of overgeneralization, I think national security concerns dominate more than on the West Coast. But I think still the flavor here of conversation has been perceiving China as a threat, even though we collaborate with China, I think on project basis, on programs at universities like Berkeley, et cetera. But talk to us about China, within China. What's the mood there? How are people looking at the competition versus collaboration balance or tension? Are people, we haven't heard much from China, and that may well be that US media aren't picking it up appropriately, right? I want to acknowledge that. What are you hearing?
Yeah, thanks, Olaf. I think I want to comment a little bit on the West Coast, East Coast difference that you just mentioned. I've lived on both coasts, and I think when I first moved to Bay Area in 2021, there was a very different landscape the landscape at the time was changing in terms of what people thought about China. Before 2020, before COVID, you saw this excitement and welcoming attitude towards Chinese companies, and back then it was mostly consumer startups. VCs in Palo Alto, in San Francisco, are trying to invest in Chinese startups in a way that has completely stopped over the past few years. And that shift in narrative, in many ways paralleled with the development of sort of the slowdown of consumer tech in this country, and also the rise of defense tech and deep tech, hard tech that had most of its audience in Washington D.C. Now, right now, I think it happened all very fast in the last 5 years. We saw some of the key figures and power brokers in Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area. They're now in positions of power in Washington D.C. So I think those two strains of development in terms of antagonism towards Chinese tech development and the attempt to contain Chinese technological progress has in many ways converged in the last few years. In terms of Chinese attitudes, to think about international collaboration, you have to visualize China 5-10 years ago. 10 years ago, you could make the argument that China must collaborate with the U.S. That the argument that the U.S. is trying to contain Chinese technological development would not be the correct assessment. I think in the last 5 years, we saw a series of government policies on the U.S. side trying to kneecap Chinese AI development. We saw export controls on some advanced semiconductors. We saw the banning of Chinese investment firms on U.S. startups and vice versa. We saw the restriction of movement of U.S. persons. That includes U.S. citizens and U.S. green card holders to work in advanced semiconductor industries in China. So in many ways, there is a sort of reality of decoupling that all Chinese companies have to work with. Right? If you're a company that's not a state affiliated, like if you're Xiaomi, if you're a Chinese smartphone company, in many ways you will have to be worried about the possibility of being cut off from the U.S. ecosystem, and that is just a reality that people have to navigate. So I guess in that sense, from the Chinese government's perspective, and I'm not the Chinese government's hotline or customer service, but from their perspective, they care about technological progress and think of ways to avoid sort of Chinese technological bottlenecks. Right? They still have a long way to go in terms of not just AI development, but also sort of the critical materials that support AI. Right? So advanced semiconductors, most of the most advanced technologies are still being made in Taiwan, and they're subject to U.S. export control. NVIDIA still makes most of their chips, but they have to think about the possibility of total economic and technological decoupling in the future. And I think with that in mind, it's really hard to talk about sort of a re-engagement of any sort in that country. But I think from a bottom-up perspective, right, I think that's where I'm more optimistic, is that, with the Chinese economic decline, everybody's just trying to make money. Right? I think Leopold Aschenbrenner, the former OpenAI researcher, wrote this widely circulated memo in San Francisco, and he was talking. It's called situational awareness. He talks about how the U.S. must get to AGI before China does. You go to China, you go to Hangzhou, you go to Beijing, you go to Shenzhen. Nobody's talking about AGI. Everybody's trying to kill their competitors before they kill Americans. Right? I think the idea of the Chinese companies have a grand strategy to topple American competitors, it is more of a wishful thinking on our end when our AI companies in the U.S. are trying to lobby for more defense funding, especially with, a $500 billion Stargate project from the Trump administration. Our researchers and profit-making corporations in Silicon Valley are trying to get these resources. So I think really there is a core tension between sort of the U.S. and China in terms of geopolitical competition and who gets to AGI first. But fundamentally, from the perspective of Chinese companies, they don't seem to care as much of that grandiose goal as they're them making profit out of a very precarious economy. And from the Chinese government's perspective, right, you see way more regulations on AI in China than the US, right? There are people always talk about how the US America innovates, Europe regulates, and China scales, right? But the reality is China also innovates and China also regulates. And if you look at the past few years of Chinese AI regulations, the first one being against deep fakes, like they call it deep synthesis, you would see the momentum is going, and they care as much about children as the Europeans or the Russians or Americans. Of course, there's more incentive for political control, censorship, etc. But the more broadly, the case for international collaboration at some level is still very real, especially now that the U.S. seems to have stepped out of the stage on that front.
Yeah, I want to underline a couple of things, right? I mean, your point on regulation in China, when I teach my executive students on the regulatory differences between the United States, China, and Europe, it is striking to many of them that actually China is very strict when it comes to safety, privacy, security, etc. And the amount of initiatives and laws that are national in nature, as opposed to the United States being very fragmented state by state, as it were, is striking. Of course, the question is always, what about enforcement, right? You can have a lot of laws, but if they're not enforced, then it's kind of for naught. But leaving that aside, the other point that you're making is, look, on a working level, again, echoing what you were saying as well, on a working level, people aren't concerned necessarily with the geopolitics. They're concerned with making a living and making their ventures, in this case, their ventures work. In your case, it's protection of children and other ethical issues. And yet, of course, at some point, somebody in China has to confront the fact that we also have some joint problems to solve, right? Whether it is making ventures work by collaborating on best practices, right? We need Chinese scientists here at Berkeley because they're fantastic. And science is a global business, as it were, right? We have many problems to solve. 500 million people migrating from climate change as climate change refugees over the next 10, 15, 20 years is a gargantuan challenge for all of us. And frankly, nobody likes migration northward that is uncontrolled. How do you manage that without AI in the picture, right? Not to mention climate change itself and educational and healthcare problems. So what's the potential here for China, the US, Europe getting together? It's encouraging that we're seeing Chinese representatives at the action summits. We're seeing Modi at the action summit, right? But is that just a facade, or is there actual collaboration happening on that level? What's the potential of that happening?
Well, I think there is a lot of shared interests and common incentives. If you look at Chinese AI regulations, and then you could look at, say, the EU AI Act or the resolution at the AI Summit in the UK, you actually see a lot of commonalities, the shared concerns and all that. The reality is, like all international organizations and like all international collaborations, because of the geopolitical fragmentation and balkanization, it is increasingly difficult to reach these agreements when, I think, if you refer to the Chinese state, it is very hard for you to come out and endorse an agreement that is, say, presented at an international conference when, our world leaders in the West couldn't make up their minds about what they want to focus on in the long term. I think that's only one part of the story. But I think you're totally right about, say, academic exchanges, right? Basically, when we talk about an AI arms race, I think this is mostly a fabricated sort of a term because so much of production of AI knowledge is international by nature, right? You see Chinese researchers at U.S. companies, you see academics at universities like Berkeley, but at the same time, we have to also recognize that the vast majority of what I would consider AI workers or workers towards the people who actually produce the AI systems include all these data laborers in Kenya. right? The people who put in their work to fact check content, to produce content moderation AI, which by the way can be a very tedious task. And there's research about the psychological effects of staring at pornography all day to label them for our platforms in the US and in the West. And in terms of that labor protection and to think about how to ensure that the benefits of artificial intelligence as a sector can be properly distributed to the people who are involved in making that system, and to adjust for that imbalance is an important area of international collaboration.
And that is overlap. I mean, we hear similar tones over here, right? I mean, even J.D. Vance said in Paris, look, we care about workers having jobs.
Yeah, but he cares about American workers who don't have to ever deal with,
Right.
the jobs that scale AI, for example. I'm not pointing at specific companies, but companies that outsource data labeling that's going to the Philippines and Kenya. That's not going to Ohio.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But so what I'm hearing from you is that, look, if we step away from the purely macro politically driven dialogues, again on a working level, people are conscious of those sensitivities. They're bounded. They're limited by them. But actually, there are a lot of solutions to be had if we collaborate on a more granular level, right? Because you can do sandboxes, you can actually monitor where technology is going, you can watermark it. There are governance and there are control mechanisms in place that can tip you off when technology wanders off into defense directions, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also more areas for protocols, right? I think when we think about US-China collaboration, I think the quote-unquote track one dialogues those often don't work. And then sometimes now we have all these track two dialogues, and those don't seem to work as well either. But you do have these what I call track 17 dialogues that's happening between developers and also open source communities, right? The people, the Chinese and Americans who work in particular industries and confronted with the same challenges in AI, and those conversations can be had, and those are probably the areas that need most collaboration and sort of international dialogue.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of those hopeful cases pop up, whether it's Rwanda with drone regulation, creating sandboxes that invite representatives from government and entrepreneurship, science, and even international observers in to see how those are going, to places like Kazakhstan that are very clearly at the intersections of geopolitical tensions, vying for international talent to come to it and help it build a viable cognitive economy. We have to work through, of course, the whitewater rapids of geopolitics on the sandbox level. I want to highlight one thing, right? That's got to be striking for everybody. We're talking a lot about the United States, Europe, and China, but there's many, many more countries. Who are we leaving out in the world? Who do we need to collaborate with more? Anybody? Yeah?
Yeah, I will say India has a role to play, and I was very glad to see that France were inviting India to co-preside the AI summit. I think India plus Europe can be a good third one in the race. And then we need to share and to think globally to empower every continent to be able to have access to AI, including education of AI.
And this is an obvious question for you because we've discussed it last Sunday. That's all fine and good. The Europeans are doing data agreements with India. The UAE goes to India. Both want Indian data. India is very digitized, as it were, through its ID card system. And yet, isn't that another form of data and AI colonialism? We have China going to Africa. We have China's digital overlay over the Belt and Road, 50 countries, 50% or north thereof of global GDP, and yet a lot of that data flows back to Beijing. Where is value really being created? Is that colonialism, the digital colonialism to come? What are you guys hearing about how we make that work for people on the ground? Yeah, go ahead, James.
Okay, so since this is a panel, right, and we're supposed to push back on each other and have a bit
Please
of a brawl.
do. Yes.
I want to
make it sparky.
Yeah, let me push back on a couple of things. I think that we're not really giving credit to a huge number of countries, South American countries, African countries, kind of Middle Eastern countries, Southeast Asian countries, that actually have very mature and sophisticated AI development ecosystems that have these types of technologies in government to a much broader extent than we have in the United States. Not everybody, but like when you actually go, Uruguay, like per capita, is the largest exporter of software in the world. Okay, right? Is that, I thought, oh, maybe everybody thought it was the United States. Maybe people thought it was Japan, right? Like, these countries have stuff going on. It's not that when we don't mention their name that they somehow are there with a zero, GDP, right? They're there being productive, doing things. I've spent a lot of time in Brazil and in Argentina, and Brazil and Argentina are AI superpowers in their own right? They're getting AI into industries that we haven't thought about in the US, right? Brazil is the first country to institute a completely digital peer-to-peer payment system that the government basically then uses in order to derive taxation and benefits, right? In the US, we're still fiddling with 25-cent coins to pay parking fees, right? So I think it's unfair that we sometimes say, like, we talk about it as if we are so sophisticated in the United States. There are many places where you can go where technology is leapfrogging the US today, on a social level, all the way up to the government level. The difference and the thing that makes the United States powerful, and the reason everybody looks to the US, twofold. The first is capital, right? We have enormous amounts of capital. Where did that capital come from? Global links, which allowed us to exploit the innovation capital around the world and bring it to the US. Why would people do that? Because we had strong links to get people to come to the US for other technology revolutions, like the internet, right? It seems now we're stopping that flow, right? So we're making a conscious choice to not continue having available in the United States those channels that were the birth of the economic development and kind of excess economic development over the last 20, 30 years. What's going to happen then? Well, guess what? Many of the countries that are basically going to leverage that and become more sophisticated in their own ecosystems. So it's not necessarily, that nobody's working, nobody's doing, or that there's going to be colonialism. Actually, right now, we might be doing more to break down that colonialism around the world through terrible policies in the United States, but might actually have an indirect positive outcome in other senses. Then the other thing I wanted to push back on, and again, I want to be a little bit gentle on this, and may your father rest in peace. But I think it has to be called out, right, that Russia is not very nice to children, right? First of all, Putin and the head of children's rights in Russia have like one of the only ICC arrest warrants on kind of war crimes against children specifically. And second of all, they've got 1 million Ukrainian children under occupation or stolen with new birth certificates, and basically one of the largest genocides, right, in human history that's happened in the last 10 years. So yeah, I've pushed back a little bit on Russia and children being like a nice.
And rightly so, and those are certainly fair points. We're also seeing Russian activity that's not very much talked about because our focus is always on China, on data hegemony in various countries down through the Middle East and into Africa. And so there is a lot to be said, obviously, on Russia. And I also want to underline your point that we need to look more locally for cutting-edge innovation, right? Nigeria is another one of these hubs, Kenya, that have tremendous digital talent and AI entrepreneurship capabilities. I mentioned Kazakhstan. And by the way, Kazakhstan is an amazing example. Kazakhstan is the number 4 country for use of ChatGPT in the world, and that's only 20 million people. And they have just trained their own LLM on Turkic, Russian, and Kazakh dialects, and are now talking to major transformer companies over here. And then, of course, there are the usual suspects of Singapore and Malaysia and Estonia, et cetera. So there's many pockets. However, I'm also going to have to push back a little bit on your pushback and say, it's one thing to say, yeah, there are these pockets, and I'm the first one to say it's sometimes a bit arrogant to think that we're top of the hill. China is top of the hill, and we're kind of ignoring other smaller countries that are really already top of the hill in many different ways. And yet, that doesn't answer the question of international collaboration, right? Because you're right, we are now looking at shutting down green cards for the sake of this strange thing called a gold card, for instance, right? For very wealthy people. And trade barriers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A myriad of things we're doing now that are staving off international collaboration to get to these pockets and to learn from these pockets. Where do you see that going? Is that sustainable? Is there a counterbalancing mechanism somewhere, some kind of backlash that will make it right again, or do we just have to live with the fact that it'll be a very fragmented world?
Well, okay, let me give a short answer, and then we probably have other answers. But basically, the biggest challenge that we're facing now that we see, and we've worked over the last 10 years with about 38, 40 governments around the world, with around like half of the world's population. So I've seen all kinds of things, right? I've worked with governments during civil wars. I've worked in governments during full-scale wars. I've worked in governments while their population is leaving in droves because of climate change. The main thing I see in the challenge of developing a coordination framework with AI is governments are AI poor in their skill set, right? We do not have AI expertise in government. We don't have it in government in the United States. We don't have it at the state level. We don't have it in Europe. There is not really a sufficient amount of AI understanding and expertise. And so we get really bizarre statements coming out of governments, and we get bizarre policies, and we get bizarre economic investment models and policies as a result of misunderstanding how things align. So I'm going to put that out there as being a very important area that we haven't addressed yet.
That's a key one, right? We spend $13 trillion on government procurement worldwide, but very little of that is going toward AI. Except for defense purposes, of course, right? Before we continue, I want to encourage all of you to raise your hands. I don't know if somebody is monitoring questions in the room, but please raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll make sure that you are heard. Otherwise, we will continue. Was that a raised hand over to the right? No, that was a wave. Hi. No hands raised yet. Oh yeah, in the back row here on the left, please. Yes. If somebody could hand the young lady a mic, and if you could please mention your name and country, since we're at iHouse, that makes it interesting. Yeah? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexia Gallen, and I guess my countries are France and Vietnam. And I had a question specifically for Tianyu Fang. You mentioned the Track 17 dialogues and how they're like forming international, they're helpful for international bylaw and collaboration. I was wondering if you could speak more a bit on how that's currently progressing and how exactly it's influencing these international collaboration systems.
Well, I think, I don't think I've seen too much of that development just yet, right? I think one example might be universities, where we have university level collaborations. We have some of these collaborations are not happening just in computer science labs, where they're also happening in biology labs, and they're coming in chemistry labs, in hospitals, et cetera, right? So I think a lot of these ties are being built across these particular sectors and intersections between different countries. But I'd love to see more of that, and if you have any sort of examples or directions you could point me to, that would be, I would really appreciate that. But I'm just, throwing the idea out there.
Well, we certainly need more iHouses around the world dedicated, and iHouse programs dedicated to AI in particular, right? So civil forums of like-minded, internationally rooted people. Any other questions? Up here on the right. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see. We are indeed, James is right, we are indeed a bit blind over there. We have a few people raising their hands, and then we'll come back to the front. Can you just walk it to whoever? Yeah, okay.
Hi.
So just shut up, right? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. So I would have one question for Professor Tian regarding AI governance in China. And in your opinion, how should the AI governance framework in the US be built so that it is enforceable by law, but at the same time become a comprehensive system similar to the one that we have in China?
Oh, that's a very. I'm not a professor, by the way. I'm just some guy. I think it's very difficult, right? Because the enforcement of AI regulations, as far as we've seen right now in China, seems to be very strong. And that's mostly because you do have a very strong state, a very authoritarian government, and strong surveillance systems, and they can arrest entrepreneurs if they want to. I'm not sure if that is exactly the kind of system that we want here in the United States. My answer is probably not. But I do think there's a lot that the US could reference, at least, right? In terms of the way that the Chinese government has been able to restrict the power of AI firms and to say, certain types of deepfakes should not be permitted. But we don't. I think 3-4 years ago there were bills in Congress that regulate data privacy, which would apply to AI policies, right? And then we have proposed bills about copyrights, but those are not happening under this administration, I'm afraid. Yeah, I think the AI regulation sort of momentum has paused in the US, and it's very unfortunate, but I think that's the reality.
Well, for the sake, again, of sort of developing a bit of a spark here, right? So yeah, that is the common perception that we in the United States are slowing on regulation. And on a federal level, it's certainly been a long time coming. But we now actually have bills on privacy pending in front of Congress, before Congress. And they're Republican-led bills, led by moderate Republicans in New York and Maryland and California, I believe. So there is an approach to helping entrepreneurs scale better by having more uniform national regulation. But you're right, of course, that it's been very slow in the United States, right, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I think the other thing is probably that there is a lot more restrictions on on the computing side of the story, right? I think when we were talking about international collaboration and new colonialism, part of that story is happening at the compute level, the very material level of, okay, now I have an idea. I'm a computer scientist in Nigeria and I want to run a startup. Where do I find the compute, right? The compute is with AWS, is with Google Cloud. And that has not been democratized in a way that it should. And I think those are probably also areas of collaboration.
And compute is, in fact, a big pinch point internationally, and more so now with the new AI Diffusion Act that the Biden administration put out there, or executive order, I should say, not an act. And we'll see whether Mr. Trump will let it live. But now, actually, countries that are sort of on the threshold and that are collaborating with China no longer have access to U.S. cloud computing. Well, then how do you actually enable entrepreneurs to scale out if you don't have your own cloud infrastructure, right? So that's a big problem. It's actually a problem for us here at UC Berkeley as well. Very, very expensive resources that a public school doesn't have an easy time furnishing, right? I see more questions. I also want to make sure that any of you who want to answer, please raise your hands or yell at me. Up here, I see faces, but I see a gestalt, but no face. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Shafali.
Hey, Shafali.
Yes, a student of Olaf's. I am from the United States. My question is actually responsive to this angst that we see from politicians around the question of AI regulation and AI safety, and taking the example of, let's say, the US-UK AI Safety Institute as an example that was backed by the major AI companies in the United States, very supportive of it. So then why in an administration and an environment which says it is business friendly and wants to loosen regulation to spur innovation, where is that message getting lost between Silicon Valley and DC?
Who wants to take that one?
Okay, all right. No, look, that's a very, very important question, and let me throw back at you an answer folded up in a story, because I like to tell stories, and that many people think that the United States is the leader right now in developing AI startups, in adopting AI within companies, and in developing AI frameworks for kind of economic transformation. So, right, how do we get that data to determine that? Well, it turns out that when you kind of scratch below the surface, it's a bunch of reports by, your usual suspects, McKinsey, Deloitte, KPMG, whoever else. How did they do those reports? Well, they kind of dig around the internet with some searches. They kind of run some keywords on some open government databases, and then they write up a nice report. All of a sudden, they've put a number out in a headline that says $6.2 trillion, or 150 billion of funding, or whatever. These numbers are completely made up. They have no correlation whatsoever with reality. And yet, they're the numbers that the White House uses when they claim that the US has more investment in AI than any other country. They're the numbers that are in the pitch deck on page 3, where it says that we are going to build a company that's going to have 3% of this $600 trillion market by 5 years from now, right? Because all startups are going to have kind of that exponential growth after 5 years. It's all smoke and mirrors. The reality actually is that the types of AI that are filtering into industry and that are having an impact on our economies are much better distributed than we think they are, right? They are in Canada, they are in the US, obviously, but actually in the US, we have a very uneven distribution of where AI is filtering in and where it's not. And you can probably imagine what that would look like if you put it onto a map. In Europe, actually, and Europe does have, across the continent, a higher density of AI startups and a higher relative density of AI investment than the United States. Okay, and take Europe as being basically very similar in terms of economic output measures that we generally use, which again, GDP, GNI, and other measures, also complete garbage most of the time, so you shouldn't rely too much on what that tells you in terms of how you compare countries. But interestingly, right, US spends $1 trillion a year basically on defense, right? Europe is accused of spending nothing on defense, about 400 billion in total across the whole continent. But which is the company that has driven AI into the defense sector and had the biggest impact in terms of the transformation of defense budgets over the last 5 years? It's a Finnish company. Not an American company. There's not a single American working there. It's a Finnish company. So Europe is like lambasted for over-regulating and being terrible and putting bureaucracy in the place. It hasn't actually stopped Europe from growing good companies with good technology, right? That's a narrative. It's a story, right? The United States not regulating, which is also a bit of a narrative because the United States does regulate in many ways and has many other levers that it pulls in order to get people to do the right thing, also hasn't been held back by those laws, and it also hasn't been helped by taking the guardrails off. So we need to be careful about how we measure things, right? And we need to also be open to the fact that when you sell a product, the people who buy it decide how they're going to use it and what they're comfortable with. In Europe, people are more comfortable with having protections around data, and they have been for a while because of GDPR and other things. But I don't actually think that it's as big a difference as we make it out to be based on this social narrative.
I want to just check in with Shefali real quick. Did we answer your question?
Yes, I appreciated the pushback on the narrative between the United States having like less regulation, furthering innovation versus the example of the Finnish company. But part of my question, I would still appreciate thoughts from those on the stage, is you were seeing companies under the last administration just 4 or 5 months ago very much advocating for a particular approach towards AI safety. And that was encapsulated, you could say, under the Biden executive order, which was recently overturned, that, for example, founded that institute that I gave as an example. And so my question is, if the experts, and we talked about government being poor in AI expertise, if the experts who understand the technology and are building the technology are asking for one thing, why then is the narrative coming out from DC that we are loosening regulation to make it easier for you when that is perhaps not responsive to what the companies wanted in the first place? And is that even an accurate understanding?
Can I just add a bit?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing is that we have to recognize there are very different schools of thought, if you will, among the AI sort of model makers. Anthropic has a very different approach. OpenAI has a very different approach, as observed in the quote-unquote coup d'état against Sam Altman a year and a half ago now. That was an example of the effective altruists who are pro AI safety and were very much behind the AI Safety Institute against sort of the effective accelerationists who believe that AI should just develop with no regulation whatsoever. So in many ways, that tension still exists in the Valley, and I think you do have this when you have a lot of capital, you try to put different levers of power in Washington D.C. And I think what we're seeing right now is people making bets before the administration came in, and now they're trying to go along with the right. I mean, this is not deterministic, right? We're seeing new ideologies and new sort of critiques of power that's coming out of the industry itself. But I think in many ways, as seen in all the anti-DEI initiatives at big tech, Sam Altman coming on and saying that he was wrong about Trump. I think a lot of these venture capitalists and entrepreneurs are going to go along with the political tide, given that the anti-regulation J.D. Vance narrative seems to be winning, at least for now.
I agree the narrative is very strong, and it's a statement, and there's a race. There's really a global race for all the governments. But the point today was also about collaboration, and I may have very optimistic and a lot of hope for more collaboration. And what, from my experience, so we are actually here because we launched an international coalition for protecting children and for having AI at the benefit of the children. And what I experience is governments want to work together, which might be surprising in this race, but we have 11 governments who stated that they want to work together with big tech companies, and big tech companies also shared the fact that they cannot do good alone. They have to work together to take the right decisions. So we have OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and Hugging Face and Plug and Play, for example, a company who are part of our coalition, and we say, okay, we can do good, but we have to do it together. So they are a little bit out of that race, or at least they agree to do it right and to do it more ethically. So just to come back to the collaborations discussion, I really think that government, big tech, but also experts, and there's a lot of AI experts who want to be part of the discussion and or don't want to be out of the discussion, or want to talk about ethics as well, and NGOs. So, and in our discussion, we also have UNESCO and UNICEF part of the discussion, of course. But I'm really hopeful for the collaboration worldwide on top of business.
So Anne-Sophie, what is the, how do we know that it's working, the collaboration, right? Because we can all agree we need more, and it's nice that we're having dialogues, but at some point, words aren't enough. There's got to be impact, right? And we have to measure impact. How is that being measured today? How can you tell whether it's being successful or not? And if it's not yet successful, what's on your wish list? Like, what do you wish would go better? Where are the hurdles?
Yeah, definitely it's too early to say if the collaboration is working or not. At least having people around the table is already a good job. For us, in our case, it took 4 months for having people saying, yes, we want to be part of the discussion. So I also acknowledge that when the deliverable of the summit is not endorsed by the UK and US, I also understand that there's a lot of statement and also a lot of yeah, it's hard to have people mentioning they want to be part of this discussion. So I think it's already a great start. How we will measure it, it will come in time for us. We have deliverables, we have deadlines that will come in the next month. We will deliver the research. We need to finance our research. And we will also have an international platform to have those discussions happen. And then in 10 years, company will not be able to say, oh, we didn't know, because they are on the picture. Like we know, they know. So at least having, because what I see is there's a lot of companies who are not doing the right things, but sometimes because they don't know. And they don't know what they don't know, and investors don't know, and startups are excited about the opportunities, and I understand that. There's a very exciting time about AI. So I cannot say what will be the KPI, but we have to build them.
So that's okay. I mean, making people aware of what needs to change is the foundation for everything, right? But let's also be realistic. We have companies like Instagram that knows that young girls are getting more depressed the more they use Instagram, and nothing is being done, or very little is being done, right? So honestly, is awareness really enough? What, at the end of the day, what are we really looking for, ideally on a global level?
I love this example because this is exactly why we do what we do. I think we really want to do everything that was not done by social media, and we think we need to anticipate. And anticipation means regulation is not fast enough. We have to collaborate now because regulation takes way too much time. And if you talk about social media, what happened is companies could do what they wanted to do. They invested millions for startups, billions for big tech company. And then when you try to negotiate, you are not talking to companies, you are talking to lobbyists. And COSA, Kids Online Safety Act, that was so close to pass, and that was a bipartisan law, couldn't pass because of lobbyists, including Meta lobbyists. So this is exactly what we want to do. The Beneficial AI for Children Coalition is to anticipate. This is why we want to work with companies, and they want to work too. That was very surprising. Like we did the pilot in December in San Francisco, and companies want to work together. They cannot do it alone. They are clear because they cannot share their market share. But collaboration is really something they want to work on it. And we definitely need to do better than social media. We shouldn't let companies investing millions and billions, because if we let them do, they will try to recruit as soon as possible, as young as possible. And as you know, AI and LLMs, they are not based on attention, which is a good point, but also they want to sell subscription. And now we are seeing some models that are wanted to sell lifetime subscription. So there is like a dependency and another business model that might be dangerous for any users, but especially for kids or for under 25 years old, because the brain is not fully developed yet. So we want to do better. We know enough, thanks to social media example, we know enough that we have to anticipate.
I want to come back to James on this particular question of indicators of international collaboration and how you measure success, right? How do we know that we're actually doing something good with each other? You're working with the European Commission. What have you seen in Europe? You seem a staunch defender of the European paradigm, and he and I are good friends, and so if we would have dinner and about 3 bottles of wine, we would go to town over where Europe is with regard to America, because I would respectfully disagree with you on European prowess on AI, not on the science level, but the entrepreneurship and scale-out level. But that aside, Europe does a lot of things very well, and cross-border collaboration with Africa, in the Middle East, for instance, and we were mentioning India, it does very well. Have you seen any examples of that? And then maybe the second question for you would be, where do you now see the collaboration between the European Union and America, given what just happened at both the Munich Security Conference and the AI Action Summit?
Okay. So I would say, first of all, there are a number of of structures that sit below the government level, which allow for communication and sharing and building things together, and that are continuing to exist and are very, very strong between Europe and the US, between the US and South America and Africa. Like, many of these structures are not going to be massively impacted. And that's because, right, when you consider innovation capital and the ecosystems necessary for it and the resources necessary for it, borders don't really play into that as much as we might think, right? Ideas travel quite freely still, right? Of course, there are things that could happen that will prevent that. But what we observe is actually many of the innovations that, say, government A is bringing in that are AI related, whether it's in infrastructure and transportation, in government services, in ways of incentivizing the economy more towards high tech, they tend to be based on taking benchmarks from other countries, right? Within Europe, actually, there are whole coalitions set up kind of at a sub-government level to enable this appropriate transfer and the co-funding of these mechanisms, right? And I would say kind of that's maybe one different, and I'm not actually a huge advocate of Europe being so incredible compared to the US. I just like to push back on the fact that like Europe and US are so fundamentally different. And if we do have that third bottle of wine, then I would pull out, obviously, you know, our studies that show like actually how many companies and all of this. But actually, these systems operate regardless of the government policy. And they operate in China, right? And they operate, you know, across Eastern Europe into the Middle East. They operate during crisis. Academic thought is one thing that's free and kind of flows very well across this, even when there are pressures otherwise. But the business pressure and kind of the idea of being able to build and create and innovate, that's happening, right? And it's happening in all countries that we work in. And it doesn't feel like it's been massively depressed. However, where is it depressed? Well, it's capital access, right? And I think that's kind of what you're getting to as well, Olaf, right? Is that if we can put capital into the right places, we can overcome a lot of the bad governance and bad policy side. And if we can empower consumers, right, then we can also push companies to make better decisions. Having said that, right, last story. In 1961, the United States made a commitment that by the year 2000, they would have solved global poverty, right? So we need more than governments making commitments, right? We need to kind of actually figure out the structure of getting us from point A to point B.
Clearly. One of your points is, look, don't discount the power of the technocrats in all of these administrations around the world collaborating because they know what's what. But now Mr. Trump is taking apart the technocracy in Washington. You know, spitball a bit here. What does this mean for collaboration between the technocrats around the world?
I think it's time, right, that we do build a global geopolitical order that's more resilient to needing the United States to be the leader. That's not to say that the United States doesn't need to play a strong role within that. And unfortunately, I think that as we were talking about right before the panel, at Wharton, right, where you know, President Trump spent his MBA, maybe, they teach game theory, but they teach it as a single-time interaction. And unfortunately, President Trump believes that the whole world is dictated by single-time interactions. But the world is a repeated game. And in a repeated game, the United States is going to get very bruised from the types of interactions that they're setting up. It might not happen quickly, but the end result's going to be quite, it's going to pull people down to the ground. And what we're going to need to do from that point is then understand that, yes, we need better collaboration mechanisms so that we're able to kind of build the strengths right across all economic spheres. Yes, we need to figure out the technology side, but we need to work on kind of structures that are going to actually incentivize countries to act in the way that's in the best interest of all, right? And we don't have those right now.
Got it. And I want to play a little ping pong between you and Tian here, but I also want to announce that we're going to go through a second round of questions here. I see hands up in the far left, up here, over here. So let me just let me maybe just play one more question here. So James, you're saying we need more people leading around the world than the United States. China is certainly raising its hand, right? But what are the mechanisms here? Because there's also a lot of objection to both the United States and China, right? This is not a clean win, if it even is considered a win for China. Who else could step up and help lead? Or what is the mechanism specifically for AI that we need to create a more resilient AI collaboration paradigm?
Well, for one, I think it is very unlikely that China will, quote unquote, lead in the air race, right? Because there's so many companies in the United States and so many companies in the European Union that are arguably much larger market players than the Chinese corporations. But I think there are several ways this could work, right? For one, we're going to see some version of multipolarity. We're going to see Chinese corporations and Chinese researchers and Chinese technology being in many ways exported to countries on the Belt and Road Initiative, right? That they have a stronger capacity to export these technologies than the U.S. now that we no longer have USAID and other sort of international collaborative resources are being taken away on the U.S. side. So that's one possibility. Right? At the same time, there might be as we've seen in the DeepSeek case, a stronger sense of open source community being involved in development of AI technologies. I think in 10 years, in 15 years, the idea of having to pay $20 a month, let alone $200 a month to a chatbot would be an utterly ridiculous idea. I think it will get cheap enough, the technology will get good enough for the model that DeepSeek is running on, the model that Facebook's Llama is running on, will be much more predominant. So in many ways, I think it will be a much more open field.
So 2 points you're making really here is, one, you're kind of playing off of James and you're saying, look, capital really may be the driver for maybe a more multilateral, multipolar system, because now that USAID is getting dismantled, we'll see how that all plays out, right? That's not done deal yet. But assuming that goes through, then obviously other multilateral organizations may need to pick that up. I could also see sovereign wealth funds stepping in, but you're saying that capital structure could actually drive more of a multilateral system that's more resilient.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the MBS in Saudi Arabia is trying to build smart cities, and he's welcomed a lot of American capital as well as Chinese entrepreneurs to build AI technologies in Riyadh. That is a possibility. I don't know if this is the possibility that I would want the most, but that seems to be what's happening, right? That you have all these global corners where collaboration is happening, where this direct U.S.-China rivalry and now U.S.-Europe-China rivalry is not so obvious or not so important.
Yeah, and to your point, right, I think the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund has earmarked some $500 billion for AI investments. The UAE is not that far behind.
And they have their own academic research institutions. They have universities, and they are frankly paying a lot of money to academics around the world to move there.
And the other thing you were saying is open source as the great hope for more collaboration, open collaboration around the world. The cat is kind of out of the bag, is what you're saying with Meta's Llama and the DeepSeek success, et cetera. That cannot be put back into the box.
No, and it is the best way to the optimization of compute on these applications is tremendous for most countries in the global south, where it is now much cheaper, with DeepSeek to train new models. And that is, in many ways, a very good thing for most people.
Thank you.
And to have that transparency for what is actually behind these model training.
Yeah, and just as a color comment here, right, I completely agree with you. Open source, of course, is harder to regulate, harder to monitor. Who is doing what for what purpose, right? That was also, frankly, Sam Altman's point, right? That as much as he's in favor of open source,
I don't know if we can say no to Sam Altman anymore. I don't know if anyone in 10 years can say no to Sam Altman. without open source.
Yeah.
I think that is the reality. We have an entire tech oligarchy that comes from Silicon Valley and are now one foot in Washington, D.C., one foot in Silicon Valley. They have resources and capital in a way that nobody else has. I don't think any legislator in Congress can say no to them. I don't think the European Union can say no to them.
So on one hand, the great hope, right, for diffusing power around the world, and on the other hand, also a real regulatory challenge. We have a number of hands up. Yes, over here.
Hi, David McGrain, American citizen, born and raised in Australia. I think we're dancing around a little. It's been said, but regulation isn't going to happen fast enough, well enough. Regime change, it won't matter. Corporations have a profit motive, and so they'll say one thing and then do another. What can we do? And especially, what can younger people do? There are students, there are universities full of students that are worried about what they're going to graduate out into, and they want to do something to temper where AI could go. So I guess it's some form of control that they would like to take back if possible. What can we do? I mean, market forces, we're consumers, you mentioned that. What can we do?
Thank you.
I absolutely love that question. I agree. We cannot wait for the regulation to come, even if we will need the regulation. But absolutely, I think it's from the younger generation and also from product developers. There is a lot of people in companies who want to do the right job, who want to be part of the solution, and we have to teach, we have to educate from younger age what is AI, what is not AI, this is also a question, and what is a human and what is not a human, so then they can know themselves, they can know the tech, and to use it the right way. And I really believe that universities have a very important role to play in educating those generation, because we need people inside those companies who want to do it right. And just a self-promotion, we are actually working on a workshop, hands-on, for people to understand themselves and AI, and we really think that this should be inside those companies. We are not looking for external punishment from regulation. We need people inside the companies and also inside the universities to want to be part of the better future. And without that, yes, regulation will take too much time. But also, as soon as people want to do it right, as soon as we collaborate, then regulation will come faster. So if some companies don't want to be part of the solution, we will need regulation. But as soon as we work together, regulation will come faster.
Let me build on that, and I'm looking toward the two of you to see if you want to as well. But I will tell you that that we need not. I fully agree with you that we need to educate from an early age, and China actually does this well in that it requires now. Correct me if I'm wrong. Coding capabilities even in primary school. Europe is debating this, the United States is debating this, but I think we need to go beyond. It can't just be the technical skills, and it cannot be, and I say this as a business professor, the business skills. We need to educate people also to think critically about artificial intelligence, and so we need to pair, and we've started doing this here now with the new College of Compute and Data Science and Society, CDSS, where we're pairing computing education with the liberal arts, with the natural sciences. Students and scientists and product developers need to know how to question the purpose of AI as well, and to tackle design from a more humanistic perspective as well. So the two need to go hand in hand, right? So that we don't just create one more brainless application that ruins more than it creates, right? We have more hands up, and I'm trying to do them all justice. The gentleman in the back there has also been waiting for a while, yeah?
So have I. Okay, hi, my name is Alexandra. I'm from the United States, specifically the East Coast, specifically Philadelphia. Anyway, so one thing I did want to mention, I forgot your name, the guy in the middle, third, second from the right. But I did want to say—
James.
Over here. I did want to say thank you for mentioning countries such as continents such as South America and Africa. I feel like those two continents have been left out in many revolutions, such as like the internet boom, the industrial revolution, and I think it's important that they're included in this next AI boom. So thank you for that. My main question is, so I'm a biochemical engineer, and there is a lot of concern with AI and water consumption. So I was wondering, with the scale up of AI, how do you see sustainability fitting into that equation?
The guy in the middle, do you want to take that one?
I'm always in the middle. Yeah. I'm a strong believer that one of the biggest challenges we're going to have with this particular technology revolution over the next 10, 15 years is figuring out its interface with sustainability. Well, actually, obviously, we're at a point in time where if we don't figure out our own human interface with sustainability in general, we're going to be screwed. And AI seems to be giving people reasons to ignore the problems even more than before. And it's true that when we're building these large models, we're using a lot of energy. It's also diverting other resources. It's causing us to extract rare earth metals and twist the arms of presidents across the world to accept bizarre deals for them. It's leading actually potentially to more geopolitical pressure as well. We as an organization were set up in order to, AI for Good was created actually to develop technologies in partnership with government in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Agenda by 2030. And I would say that structural issues got in the way of that, much like they did in 1961. And where do we find ourselves today? And actually, I think these two questions are linked. The Australian, non-Australian gentleman that went before you and you, is that when Sebastian was born, the kid sat at the back of the room, I suddenly realized what it meant when my parents said, and when others said, what is the world that we're leaving to our children? And unfortunately, many of you in this room are going to be responsible for having to stand up and be activists and really figure out how we solve some of the problems that my generation and my parents' generation were not able to stand up and properly solve. And so the answer to your question is actually that you need to get out there and start building some of the solutions to these problems and not taking no for an answer and getting yourselves into the room that makes the decisions and not feeling that one person working on these challenges is too little, right? And I know it sounds kind of cliche, right? Because we hear this all the time and it sounds a bit like a commencement speech type of thing. But to give you an example, yesterday or 2 days ago, we put out a study that debunked the myth that the US has given $500 billion or even $135 billion to Ukraine over the last 3 years, right? The reality is that the US has given about $50 billion. And that helped the Ukrainian government to put pressure to remove a $500 billion lien basically on its mineral resources from an agreement that they're negotiating. We did that with a team of 5 people, 4 of which were URAPs, undergraduate research assistants, apprenticeship program participants from UC Berkeley, right? Like many of you in this room, right? And that had a huge impact just yesterday. So I encourage you, right, that with AI, with children's values and kind of, yes, thank you. We need to have more people who actually stick their neck out and do something. That's the reality.
I think Anne-Sophie, thank you. Anne-Sophie wants to chime in.
Something small to build on that. I think that was something in the AI Action Summit that people say, okay, now that we not really can count on governments, we have to do something. So a lot of people came to us, say, okay, we need you guys to do something to protect children because we cannot count on governments. So I think NGOs has a really big role to play, and hopefully we will see more NGOs taking action like AI for Good is doing.
Yeah, and I think we need to inspire young people to look at those problems like water, for instance, right? I mean, there is a lot of difference, meaning impact to be had and also money to be made. This idea that you have to develop the next social media product or the next CRM or ERP solution, and that's the path to go because that's the trodden path that VCs keep touting, is I think outdated. And I think lots of young people that I teach are ready for that. They're ready to devote themselves, like the people that are working for you, James, to devote themselves to those higher purpose undertakings, right? I don't know who it was. I'm probably going to get it wrong. Maybe it was Andresen or maybe it was Thiel or somebody like that, whatever you think about them. Thank you. Whatever you think about them said, we wanted flying cars and we got 140 characters. And his point was, look, it's up to us to decide, to your point, James, what we use AI for. Have we been misappropriating its creative power, right? And that's a question we need to ask over and over and over. In academia, that's our responsibility, right? So thank you for that question. The gentleman in the back, finally, yes, sir.
I'm Joe, I'm from the United States, and I've noticed an increasing spate of articles here in the United States and critiques from other countries and other parts of the world about the bias that's in AI, certainly in the United States, because of its limitations of access to data around the world and its limitations with regard to its linguistic capacity. So my question to you is, to what extent do you think bias in AI, wherever it is, whether it's in the United States or in China or in parts of Latin America, Africa, being limited by their languages and their access to limitations in data is a challenge to collaboration?
Who wants to take that one?
I want to say the answer is in the question. I agree with you that it is way too much bias in the models, but maybe you want.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it is a top. I mean, I think it should be one of the top concerns, but I think unfortunately it is not. I think I'm pretty sure China doesn't care that much about this. I think they're doing a terrible job. I mean, they're specifically using artificial intelligence for racial profiling purposes. We see similar things here in the United States. I can see a strong role for civil society to step in and say, these are the things that the AI systems should improve on. But I think that is unfortunately very, very difficult. I think as the data that we use to train AI systems diversify in the future, I think this will probably get better, but that will require a mass collection of even more data that requires the encroachment of our daily lives and privacy. I think Ruha Benjamin made a sort of a great point in her book, Race After Technology, about how collecting data from Black Americans and not collecting enough data from Black Americans pose the same problem, right? On the one hand, if you're not collecting data from Black Americans, you're excluding certain people and certain demographics from existing technology and technological infrastructure that people rely on. But at the same time, if you expand your databases, you're allowing companies like OpenAI to encroach in more people's privacy and private data even further, and that will harm disproportionately marginalized communities. So I think it poses it is a double-edged sword that is very difficult to be solved, unfortunately.
I'm happy to chime in, but James, I saw you grabbing the mic.
Okay, just very quickly, we're not going to be able to solve anything relating to bias in artificial intelligence models until we grapple with all of the existing institutional and societal bias that created the data that went into those models. So the problem isn't actually at the level of AI, right? AI is a fantastic way of scaling the challenges that are there and making the problem bigger, but it's not actually the artificial intelligence, algorithmic layer and modeling, which is the challenge here. It's actually that the data was generated by processes that were biased. And that's a very, very complicated discussion that we could spend hours on by itself. But the reality is, actually, what I have found over the last 10 years is that by being in this AI space, I get to have conversations with governments that open up discussions on topics that are otherwise taboo, right? That you can't talk about unless you come in and say, oh, AI is going to impact this. And then all of a sudden, you can start to have those discussions. So I'd say that there's a little flicker of hope in that, right? That AI might actually be the gateway for us to be able to go and break down some of the processes, like access to credit, which, by the way, was systematically made more difficult for minorities in the US by the US government policy, right? We can break down some of those things because of AI being the beast in the room.
I'm going to layer onto that. To James's point, of ingrained data bias. I teach a course in ethical AI business design that you attended, and I think we need to teach young people what that actually means. And to this point, it means that we have to force even entrepreneurs to keep data logs. Log exactly who you are, why are you collecting data on somebody and who, what's their profile, and how is the data going to be used? Make it transparent. That doesn't mean everybody who's collecting data is automatically biased or having bad intentions. It means that we actually have a record of what the database consists of. But I want to tell you also that there is hope, right? So again, I don't want to keep harking on Kazakhstan, but it's a very foresightful government that has picked up exactly the point that you're making. They have said nobody is picking up the staff for people who speak Turkic or who speak Kazakh. We will. And so they've developed their own model, thanks to open source. 150 billion tokens. A token is about as much as a word. And they're now working with the hyperscalers like OpenAI to make sure that that language and the tradition and the cultural notions flow back into mainstream models. And OpenAI, actually, if you talk to people like Anna Makanju, their VP for Impact, they're very welcoming, and they want this because obviously it grows their market as well, and they can have an impact. And so some of these things are being done. Now, coming back to the woman who talked about Africa, this does have to do with AI strategy. Africa has fantastic entrepreneurship, lots of data, but it doesn't have a unified voice or a unified strategy. And so it's very hard to advocate for Africa in a fragmented way against the big 800-pound gorillas. But foresightful governments can and are doing this, and I'm not giving hope up for the others. Okay, I think we have one more question, two more questions, three more questions, but we have to start to wrap up. So let me batch them together, please, if I may. The gentleman in the front first, and then I'll come to you, and then we'll wrap it up together.
Hi, the proponents and benefactors of AI are governments, tech corporations, and research universities. What about the other 7.9 billion of us? What are, in the B school, we talk about better, faster, cheaper, but what about risk? What is the risk to the rest of us?
Yeah, definitely a question of, democratic representation in the innovation ecosystem, and how do we make individual voices heard on the ethical front. So let's think about that. Thank you, sir. Yes, please, here to the left. Thank you, Natalie.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm an American, but my parents are immigrants from India. Thank you for doing this panel. We've heard a lot about the software side of things when it comes to regulation and development, AI, geopolitics, but what about the hardware side of things? Do you anticipate any challenges or hopes with hardware supporting AI? I know there's like a lot of chips and stuff coming out of Taiwan, lots of investment in the US here to expand our chip manufacturing capabilities, but where does that place us in terms of balancing our software side of things in the US for developing AI versus hardware?
Great question. Physical AI, thank you very much. And one more here, I think, or was it back there? I can't remember. Okay. Yep.
Thank you. So we're here to talk about collaboration, and I would like to talk about, so in terms or in borders collaboration, because most of the big tech companies are from US. and they're present in the wide world. They make profit thanks to Europe or Africa, whatever. And I would like to listen to your opinion about the collaboration between big tech companies and the US governments, for example, because there are some projects where the government wants to work with AI models developed by those big tech companies. And so what do you think about these interns collaborations?
Okay, let me try to clarify, and you might need to repeat this, but you're saying a lot of governments around the world want to use these models, but rely on, as we've established, the five, as you call them, AI oligopolists. Now, let's add maybe 4 or 5 Chinese companies to that, but it's still an oligopoly globally. Is that what you're saying? How do we deal with that?
Yeah. So, do you know the Maven project? It's like a project between Google and the governments. They wanted to develop with the army a little weapon. And so, what do you think about this kind of collaboration? Because those kind of companies, they make huge profits in worldwide, but these profits will come and will benefit the US government, for example. So what do you think about that? Would you allow this kind of collaboration? Would you regulate those kind of collaboration?
Okay, yeah, now I get it. Okay, so this is like the militarization of AI, and we have in fact seen a bit of a transformation in Silicon Valley where more and more AI firms actually service military purposes, right? So thank you very much. So we have those 3 questions. Let's pick. Which one would you like to answer?
I'll take the last one.
Okay.
I think there is a very uncomfortable and worrying development in Silicon Valley. That is, all of our best and brightest graduates from top universities are going to work in defense tech. And I think there is a lot of legitimate research that's coming out of defense tech companies, but there is also an effort to label everything as defense tech so that we can get government contracts and government funding. And the government is very happy with that. And I don't know if regulation is the right answer. I think, we have seen the use of new AI technologies in Ukraine, but also in Gaza, right? We've seen these attacks on using technology to participate in warfare, and sometimes there are disastrous consequences that our leaders in this country, our tech oligarchs in this country, have the sole capability to determine how these technologies are used. And I think that's very worrying. I don't think anyone is trying to regulate that. I don't think there is any international, I'm very sad to say this, right? This administration is in bed with our tech oligarchs, and I don't think there's any way out of that. And you're seeing more or less the same thing in China, right? The Chinese companies are increasingly willing or increasingly reliant on Chinese government resources, and there is, like the United States, a military-industrial complex out there. And I think both developments are very worrying, and that links to, hardware resources that are affected by geopolitics. China's the possibility that China will invade Taiwan is extremely worrying, and this U.S.-Taiwan alliance, if you will, might not be as stable as we think it is. When a 60 Minutes reporter was asking Gina Raimondo, the former Secretary of State, Secretary Raimondo said, "Oh, we have most of the advanced chips in the U.S." And the 60-minute report was like, "Oh, by we, you mean Taiwan?" She's like, "Yeah, that's right." I think we are being completely delusional about the geopolitical realities when we think about these hardware resources.
Yeah. I would say I agree with you. The regulation will not happen here in the United States, and I also doubt that it'll happen globally. But regulation is maybe the wrong word. Global governance, and that's to your point, does need to happen. And we do have people, very prominent people like Stuart Russell here at Berkeley, who is working with the United Nations to make sure that AI is not getting weaponized, or that weapons aren't getting AI-fied, as it were, without human in the loop. How promising that is, your guess is as good as mine. The political and the capital interests behind that development are very sizable. But there are very renowned people pushing for that kind of global accord. Whether we can get to something like that, like a Geneva Accord or like a biochemical weapons convention for AI, we'll see, and it'll probably take a decade or two, if that, right? But it's definitely a worthwhile undertaking. We had two more questions on physical AI, and of course, civil society involvement in AI. Who wants to take those two?
Just want to jump quickly on the physical AI and the robotics. I think a lot is coming because the technology is a lot advanced. I think still, if you see a robot, keep your distance because there is no enough balance to make it safe for people going around, and it's not coming in our environment and in our houses for a few years at least. I think there's a lot of opportunities for industries. The humanoid robots have a lot of opportunities for that, and just from my point of view, I cannot talk about humanoid robots without thinking about the impact on the society and on the risk of isolation. Like if you are talking to a human in your house, or then you might need, you may have more time to do free time, like maybe more scrolling on your phone, which might not be the best for the mental health. So I'm always very worried with those funny videos we see online about humanoid robots. For sure they are coming, even if it will take more time, but we need to think about what we will lose. Everyday chores make sense for humans to do it, for their mental health and for having a sense of life. So
yeah,
just think we need to anticipate again.
Think critically about all of this. But I will tell you, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to hopefully contribute a tiny bit to your inspiration, right? And it seems like you're already very savvy in that direction. I think there are phenomenal horizons ahead. And where by the way, we can learn across borders from countries like Japan. Japan has a big problem. They're short about 1 million caregivers in the country, and the population is aging, right? And so they're very pro-robot. Right? If you're not making enough babies and you don't like immigrants, then what's left but robots, right? And they're very friendly toward robots. And in fact, they're very advanced. And so robots in elder care, for instance, fantastic opportunities. I just gave a talk at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, and saw some of the US robots they're starting to feature in elder care and in hospitals, helping, for instance, prevent nurses from having to lift very heavily, right? Or playing games with the elderly when no caretaker is available or the family is not available, whatever it may be. Fantastic horizons. Similarly, on our Berkeley NASA Space Campus, we're now exploring AI for space exploration, also fantastic. So there are a lot of ways to look at the future as bright, where we can learn from other countries if we keep collaborating, right? Okay, we have another question that hasn't been answered on civil society. I don't know, James, do you want to take that one?
Sure, recap.
The recap was, the gentleman here said, look, obviously, as we've been discussing, the conversation and the development seems to be monopolized by large corporations and governments and
academia.
Big capital.
And academia.
And academia, right? But what about the rest of us? How do we have a voice? What role do we play in this? And please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I heard, right?
Right. Well, in society, we have the role that we choose to play. And right now, those roles are shifting. And I feel that we are in, a decade, at least, of instability, which is going to redefine the way that capital flows. It's going to redefine the way that we think about society. Consider that in the UK, just a few weeks ago, a poll among young people found that the majority of them no longer believes that democracy is the best form of government. That's worrying, right? And it should be cause for worry whether you believe that AI is an existential risk to humans or you believe that Trump is an existential risk to humans. The point is that we still, we can vote, right? We can vote with our feet, we can vote with our ideas, We can innovate and we can choose to build an alternative reality to the one that we're being presented. We can engage with each other and build coalitions of ideas in order to tackle even very, very big challenges. And I think it's going to be important that we do rally around things like the Sustainable Development Agenda, right? No matter what we choose to do with liquefied natural gas and fracking and other methods of extracting from the earth in the United States, we are still going to have to deal with the consequences of climate change. It's not going to change. It's still better to not be burning things if we can avoid it, right? No matter what you believe. At some point, we're going to have to find common narratives and still tackle these challenges, no matter what our government is talking about and no matter what the big corporations are working on. And the advantage, as the gentleman was saying, is that there are 7.98 billion people available for that job, right? We just have to do it.
I would add one quick point about international collaboration, because all of these risks and challenges are by nature transnational, right? That these are not just American problems, these are not just Chinese problems. And the same crisis that the Chinese worker is facing with surveillance systems in their factories, it's the same problem that Americans are facing. And and it's the same problem that Chileans and Mexicans, these are fundamentally transnational problems. And to resolve them, these should not be resolved with nationalist solutions. We have to recognize that these are global systems.
Yeah, I mean, the future of work, for instance, right, or balancing of human and automated robotic labor, right, all of those are things that other societies are facing as well. China is shrinking down from 1.4 to 800 million. Japan is literally dying out. Germany is dying out. Vietnam is starting to shrink. And so issues like that, ethical issues, responsibility issues, are global issues, and politicians will listen at some point, will listen to the people that they trust to keep them in power. Open source, again, I think open source, if handled responsibly, and if we find governance ways, are the best way to empower civil society. I will give you an example. I just interviewed the chief data scientist of a big company. I won't name a name, but she was reciting that I'm writing this next book on the global data economy, and she said, to the gentleman's point in the upper left here, that Native American populations, for instance, don't want to make their cultural narratives available to model training, because in some tribes, there are layers upon layers of rights and empowerment of who gets to transmit what kind of narrative about the culture so that it stays and has integrity. And she is saying that, with open source now, tribal members can start to code in a way that's appropriate for their cultural content and for the permissioning. And so open source can empower communities, again, if we find some way to monitor and regulate so it's not being abused, right? Okay, so with that said, I think I'm going to have to start to close us out. We're 10 minutes late as it is. I will ask each one of you the one unfair curveball question, which is, if you had a crystal ball, what one thing would you ask it with regard to international collaboration? Who wants to go first? Yeah? Anne-Sophie?
One word, I will wish, at least, my hope is multi-stakeholder and multidiscipline collaboration.
Multi-stakeholder, civil society. Yeah? James?
Yeah, I wasn't really able to come up with a single question, so...
Give me three.
Okay. How long is it going to take for us to understand how to develop innovation on a societal level, not just on a corporate level, not on a government level, but on a societal level?
So how fast can we get to some kind of shared consciousness that needs to happen, and some traction to use it, not for 140 characters, but for whatever the equivalent is of flying cars in education and health and environment, etc. Yeah? Okay, Jan.
I'm just wondering who's going to say no to Sam Altman.
You're wondering when we're going to say no to Sam?
No, who's going to be able to say no to Sam Altman? I don't know. I don't think there's an answer.
Yeah.
And I hope there will be an answer in 10 years, or there still will be an answer in 10 years.
Yeah. What's the future of AI power, and in whose hands does it rest? Ideally, not just the top 5 in the world. Thank you so much. Everybody, we have overstayed our welcome. Let's give a big round of applause to our panel.